Anthony Rendon is about to get paid, but how much is he worth? Could he have had a better walk year than he had heading into free agency? I mean, he just killed it, not only in the regular season, but throughout the playoff run. His value is at an all-time high. It has to be.
Yeah, like you said, career year. You can argue he was also a World Series MVP. And he's coming to the marketplace at a position that has very little depth, both in baseball, but also especially in this free agent market. I think that you're going to have to back up the Brinks truck. I mean, you look at the projections, he's the most valuable free agent, regardless of position, coming out this year on the market. And I think it's going to take a serious offer. And by that, I mean, there were some reports that the Nationals offered him between $210 and $215 million over 7 years in September. That included some deferred payments, which automatically lower the value of the contract. I don't think that's going to get it done. Based on what I have here, he's probably worth closer to $250 million over 7 years without any deferred money. So it'll be interesting to see what happens and how not only the Nationals pursue him, but also the other teams at large, because players like him, like you said, in this type of circumstance don't come around often, and he could be a key piece to any team going forward.
Who are the 2 or 3 most likely suitors besides the Washington Nationals? Who's going to be really heavy after him?
I think Texas needs a third baseman. I'm not really sure who else might throw some money at him, but there was some talk maybe the Dodgers might be interested. I think if the Dodgers are involved, then that could be something interesting. From what I understand, they may have offered $200 million over 5 years. Maybe the Yankees. There's a lot of talk about who's going to be interested. And I think, it depends on what you're talking about. If you ask what teams are interested, obviously there's going to be a lot more teams that are interested. Who might actually extend an offer to him, I think, is a much smaller pool of clubs.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
And they can't afford to lose him, the Nationals can, in my opinion.
Yeah, but if it comes down to Rendon and Strauss, where are you going to throw your money?
Well, I think you have to throw it at Rendon only because you got Corbin as kind of a buffer in case Strasburg does leave. It gives you 2 top-of-the-rotation pitchers in Strasburg and Corbin. And there's some decent pitching on the market that if you really needed a third starter, you can probably find one. But the drop-off from Strasburg at 31 years old to another pitcher versus Rendon, who's coming into this prime at third base, is much different. Who would they get to replace Rendon at third base?
Unless they think Carter Kieboom is their guy.
I think that's what they think.
Is he an NL MVP finalist? Because that's what Rendon was, right? I mean,
no. I think it's a huge leap, and I think it's I wouldn't.
But you got to see what you got in the farm,
right?
Don't
you
think?
You do. Absolutely.
Unless they can bridge it with Josh Donaldson for 2 years until they.
That's another thing, right? He's the only other. I hate to use the word viable third baseman, but he's the only other third baseman that gives you the same type of clout. He's 34 years old. He'll be 34 years old. So obviously you're not going to extend to him a contract like you would Anthony Rendon.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting situation for this team. I don't know how many teams could survive the loss of Harper and Rendon in back-to-back years. I know they have Harper. I know that they have, some of the other young guys, but I don't know how much of that. How much can Soto do? How much better can Soto get, right? How much more of a load can Soto carry? I mean, he's not going to bat 400 with 60 home runs to help, ease the loss of Rendon. I think that, he's kind of near the ceiling. It's an amazing ceiling. I'm not taking anything away from it, but, to ask him to improve even more based on the last 2 years, I think would be a tough challenge.
Well, they've got some decisions, obviously, there at third base if they lose Rendon, who to replace him with. Strasburg, huge decision. What are they going to do at second base? I mean, Carter Kieboom, I would think, is going to be in play either at second or third if they do lose Rendon. And then at first base, I know they're talking about possibly, doing a little platoon thing with Zim. And then if it's Kendrick if he's back and then or someone else, but they have to certainly address that going forward. First base, these two guys, if not more, maybe. So they've got, and then a catcher. I mean, they're going to bring back and Suzuki. They were pretty good, but they've got 4 or 5 legitimate questions, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of unknowns circling this team, and I also think winning the World Series helps players move on. I think it's a way to kind of close the chapter on this part of their lives and move on to a place that maybe they'd rather play with. Right? They don't necessarily have to just chase the money. Right? I mean, you win a World Series, you always have that. It wouldn't surprise me to see Rendon take a look at a team based in Texas where he's from. Wouldn't surprise me to see Strasburg take a big interest in San Diego where he's from. And I just think, just my own personal experience and just what my own personal anecdote, that it would be easier to make that move coming off a championship season.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, because I've just assumed, and I think it's fair to say the conventional wisdom is you're going to lose Rendon, but Strauss has shown an inclination to want to be here, that he moved his family here, he sold his home in San Diego, that he would stay. But you actually pose a scenario that I haven't considered, which would be the opposite, which would be that Strauss maybe is blown away by a bigger offer, and Rendon, ultimately, the team decides they'd rather keep him. That's not a scenario I've actually considered. That Strauss goes and Rendon stays. Maybe that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think Corbin, the addition of Corbin was kind of that did happen. Mm-hmm. Having two aces at the front of your rotation is pretty good, right? Having 3 like they had was a luxury, and obviously it was a World Series winning formula. I guess the question is, does Strasburg think he can get more than 4 years, $100 million on the free agent market? And if so, do the Nationals pay it? Right? I mean, it's and I guess it also depends on how quickly Rendon makes a decision. Because if they feel like they've missed out on Rendon, then maybe they make more of a push to have Strasburg stay. It's an
interesting dynamic. There's a lot going on. Lavero brought up a great point the other day when I heard him on with Chad that. I believe the big reason why they didn't re-sign Jordan Zimmerman was because they believe in the shelf life of guys that have had Tommy John surgeries, right? And so it's been quite a while since Stevens had his, and so that may factor in. But the other part of that, to counter it, is they've always had an inclination to spend on pitchers more than they have on position players. So there's a lot of dynamics going into this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think they're comfortable with their young guys, and rightly so, right? I mean, we saw what Soto did, Victor Robles. So there's definitely some upside there, and
got a great farm system.
And we also saw how good, how important pitching was. You look at the teams that were in the World Series or got close, they had some strong pitching.
Yeah.